professor of is very interesting, especially after I see myself here doing this, when I was supposed to be teaching history of Spanish literature. But anyway, we're here and we're going to try to explain why we're here. Put it in very simplistic terms, I think that this is the result of, well, on the one hand, meeting Fernando Sancho here, even if he's from Sevilla some years ago. He was a postdoctoral student at the computer science department. And the other part is when we put together the application for the Hispanic Baroque project, we said many nice things. So nice that they gave us the grant. But when we started working on the whole thing, we realized that regardless of the computer models, of the mathematical tools of analysis that you wanted to use to solve the problems, not many people have really worked on being able to solve the problem of if one or two or three paintings from a Spanish painter or a book goes in the 16th century to America, what's going to happen and how it's going to happen and what is it that happened. So after reading many of the theories on the Baroque from many places, there are certain characteristics about what constitutes a Baroque process or how a culture, a society of a group of artists get more Baroque. But there are a couple of problems that nobody has solved or even mentioned in many cases. What is it the Baroque of the Baroque? So what we are talking about? When we're talking about an Italian painting as this morning, is the same as Don Quixote's, or something by Sor Juan in Mexico and by a musician of the Baroque style in Peru? Is it the same thing or not, or what's going on? And the second thing is, are there things, styles and periods or groups, people more Baroque than others, and how do you measure that? I have to advance that we haven't solved the problem, but by doing this kind of agent-based simulation, at least we have been able to realize what the whole problem of this kind of enterprise is. So this is what we have been able to do so far. Let's go. We're going to divide the presentation in 4 parts. In the first part, we're going to throw in some of the main theories and ideas about culture by some evolutionary biologists, anthropologists, historians, etc. You will see what the problems are there. We're going to introduce you to the game of culture that we are making the agents play. We, in the third place, will show the rules that govern our world, the one that we have built in NetLogo. And then at the end, we'll show some cases with some worlds that we have built and what happens with them. And we'll try to draw some conclusions from there, especially for work ahead. So let's get started with nothing. Okay, with some of the main ideas today about culture. And I'm talking about culture in terms of big culture, how things go from one place to another. The problem about memetics and memes and all those things that sometimes doesn't make any sense for people in the humanities, but with migrations and these kind of big problems, you have to address somehow. So starting at the bottom, we have the Heydrich and Boyd article of 2002 are talking especially about 2 problems. One, the problem of the epidemiology of representations, as Sperber called it in an article in the 90s, I think, how things go from one mind to another and how all those processes happen. And they are also especially addressing the problem that Richard Dawkins and Sarah Blackmore raised when they started talking about memes as discrete units of culture, similar to the DNA that you can somehow trace or not. Nobody has been able to point out what a meme exactly is. So they are talking about mental representations as non-discrete, and this is especially important, cultural transmission as highly inaccurate. And they are making an important point of distinction between this and genetic reproduction, I don't know if it's called like that, so that different models and processes and concepts have to be used to address one another. Mental representations are not replicated, but reconstructed through inferential processes. And they talk about cognitive attractors, bringing in some of the concepts from cognitive science. In another interesting statement, Sperber and Hirschfeld, the same Sperber of the epidemiology of representation, talk about cultural groups as things that are held together by a constant flow of information. And I think that's very important, and some of this is seen in some of the models we have built. Most of this information is about local circumstances and not transmitted much beyond them. Culture then refers to this widely distributed information. And I'll say that there's a difference between the process of keeping a group together through the flow of information and the content of that information at any given point. Its representations in people's minds, in what Sperber and then other anthropologists have been talking mentioning as an ecosystem of brains, and its expressions in their behaviors and interactions. Then again, in a very now famous book by Richardson and Boyd of 2005 called Not by Genes Alone, in which they address the problem of culture as an adaptative tool. They define culture as information capable of affecting individuals' behavior that they acquire from other members of their species through teaching, imitation, and other forms of social transmission. And I would say from the point of view of the history of culture here, that they are missing one part, which is we also learn from objects, cultural objects produced by other people. So the relation is not always human being to human being, in my opinion. And that's what is missing in many of the models and approaches to culture these days. And finally, Cavalli Sforza, who is an evolutionary biologist, I think an anthropologist from Italy, that has been working in La Jolla, in California, for a long time, in the Spanish translation of a book called Cultural Evolution or something like that, he talks about culture as global accumulation of knowledge and innovations. So it's not only information. Innovations which are the product of individual contributions transmitted from generation to generation and spread in our social group that constantly influence and change our lives. The factor of being affected by information seems to be very important today. One more thing that I have to say about Richardson and Boyd. One of the main points they raise is that if you want to study culture, you have to study it at the level of the population. So it's a problem of population dynamics for them, mainly. Not only, but mainly. And they are, especially Boyd, I think that he's very involved with the Santa Fe Institute. So you can see where he's coming from in terms of complexity, complex system.